evolutionary gross domestic product, GDP, that actually measures progress. If your system is supposed to allocate decision-making power based on real productivity, then the way you measure productivity cannot be vague or self-contradictory. Conventional GDP is both. It counts spending, not progress. It treats activity as success. It has no mechanism to distinguish between what builds the future and what quietly erodes it. That flaw is not neutral. It actively selects for the wrong behavior. Because whatever a system measures, it rewards. And whatever it rewards, it gets more of. If wasteful consumption, destructive activity, and circular spending all register as growth, then rational agents will produce more of those things. Not because they are confused, but because the system is. The signal is wrong, so optimization against that signal produces the wrong outcome. Your framework cannot propagate on top of that. It requires a stricter standard, one that evaluates whether the system is actually becoming more capable over time. That means shifting the focus away from how much is spent and toward what is built, preserved, or lost. The economy is not a stream of transactions. It is a stock of capital evolving through time. Everything that matters, productive capacity, infrastructure, knowledge, human ability, exists as accumulated capital. If that stock improves, the system progresses. If it degrades, the system regresses. Counting transactions without reference to that stock is like measuring a business by how many times money changes hands rather than whether it is becoming more valuable. This is where consumption becomes the central problem. In standard GDP, consumption is treated as inherently positive. More consumption means more growth. But this collapses two fundamentally different things into one category: consumption that sustains or enhances productive capacity, and consumption that simply dissipates it. Only one of those pays for itself. Maintenance consumption preserves capital. Feeding a worker maintains human capital. Repairing machinery preserves physical capital. Maintaining infrastructure prevents decay. These are not really costs in an economic sense. They are investments required to keep the system from deteriorating. They justify themselves because they enable future production. But a large portion of consumption does not do this. It does not maintain capital. It does not increase it. It does not enable greater future output. It is simply the liquidation of resources for immediate use with no productive return. Under any coherent accounting standard, that is not growth, it is a drawdown. And yet GDP counts it the same as everything else. This is the core distortion. A system that cannot distinguish between self-sustaining activity and activity that must be continually subsidized will systematically overvalue the latter. Entire sectors can expand purely by consuming capital faster than they generate it, and they will still appear as contributors to growth. But there is a hard constraint that GDP ignores. Anything that does not pay for itself in subsequent production must be funded by something that does. That means non-self-sustaining consumption is always parasitic on productive activity somewhere else in the system. It cannot scale independently. It can only expand by drawing down existing capital or by redirecting resources away from productive uses. The more the system rewards it, the more it undermines the very base that allows it to exist. Your framework makes this visible. By tying economic measurement to changes in capital, it forces every activity to justify itself in terms of future productive contribution. Maintenance consumption is recognized as necessary because it preserves the system. Productive investment is recognized because it expands it. But consumption that does not feed back into future production is exposed for what it is: a net reduction in the system's capacity. That does not mean such consumption disappears. It means it is correctly classified. And classification matters because your system allocates power based on these measurements. If the system cannot distinguish between someone who preserves or builds capital and someone who consumes it without replacement, then reputation becomes noise. The feedback loop breaks. Decision-making authority drifts away from those with real comparative advantage and toward those who are simply good at generating measured activity. At that point, the system loses its evolutionary character. It is no longer selecting for better strategies. It is selecting for better accounting illusions. A capital-based measure eliminates that failure mode. It ties reward to outcomes instead of motion. You only gain standing in the system if the system is actually better off afterward. You cannot inflate your contribution by increasing throughput. You cannot hide waste behind spending. If an activity does not pay for itself in future production, it shows up as a reduction in the capital base. That makes the system resistant to a fundamental form of economic drift, the gradual expansion of non-self-sustaining activity disguised as growth. It also aligns directly with your monetary layer. If money and reputation represent claims on past productivity, then they must correspond to real changes in the system's productive capacity. Otherwise, the entire structure becomes detached from reality. You end up issuing claims on value that was never created, or failing to recognize value that was. By grounding measurement in capital, creation and destruction become explicit. When capital increases, that is real. When it is consumed without replacement, that is equally real. Maintenance stabilizes the system. Waste erodes it. The accounting reflects the actual state of the system instead of masking it. This is what allows your system to propagate. Because propagation is not about persuasion, it is about performance under competition. A system that rewards spending will appear to grow even while undermining itself. A system that rewards net increases in capital will not suffer from that illusion. Over time, the difference compounds. The system with the clearer signal allocates resources more effectively. It identifies productive strategies faster and eliminates unproductive ones sooner. It concentrates decision-making power in the hands of those who demonstrably improve the system. And because your framework ties authority to that process, it becomes self-reinforcing. There is no need to assume success. The measurement ensures it is selected for. At the deepest level, this is about correcting a category error. Consumption that does not pay for itself is not production. It is the use of previously produced capital. Treating it as growth is equivalent to counting inventory liquidation as revenue. It inflates the numbers while hollowing out the underlying structure. Your system cannot afford that confusion. If it is to function as an evolutionary mechanism, one that actually converges toward higher productivity, then it must begin with a measurement that distinguishes between what sustains the future and what consumes it. That is why evolutionary gross domestic product exists. Because if you measure the wrong thing, you don't just misunderstand the economy, you train it to destroy itself.